Welcome. I'm glad to see everybody here. We are a full commission, and I welcome you to our July meeting. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Brombach?
Here.
Commissioner Kralik?
Present.
Commissioner Lee?
Present.
Vice Chair Onan?
Here.
Commissioner Smith?
Here.
Chair Stinger?
Here.
Commissioner Shi?
Present.
Thank you.
Agenda changes, requests, deletions.
I think you have one, Chair. You wanted to do one?
I do have one. I just was opening it up for others. I'm going to ask if we can switch 2 and 3. 3 is really the meat of our discussion, and I'd like to make sure we have time for that if we have to cut anything short. I have no oral communication cards, so we'll get right to business. Our first business is to follow up on our retreat. One of the questions that we asked at the retreat, or that was asked by our facilitator, was how can we achieve the best outcomes and avoid the worst outcomes today? And when we were asked that question, we as a body said we wanted to stay focused on our roles and jurisdiction, and we wanted to establish our scope. So that brings us to agenda item 1, and our city attorney, Molly Stump. I know Molly sits in the 8th floor, and I know that you spend a lot of evenings in these chambers, but I know you from the May Day Parade and other city events.
Do you want to just, Sabrina just came to introduce her quickly so she doesn't have to stay.
I will. Thank you. I'll just finish by saying that I am thrilled that we have your legal expertise tonight and your knowledge of the social fabric of our city. Before I turn the mic over to you, however, I wanted to introduce Sabrina Proctor to our commissioners. Sabrina is our summer intern, and she's doing a fabulous job on 3 projects, if I'm correct.
Probably more, but that's what we have right now.
They're all important, but one of them is particularly near and dear to a subcommittee of us, and that is the needs assessment for the LGBTQ community. And we will be working to do the needs assessment, to identify programs and prioritize them, and bring recommendations to this commission in September. So welcome, Sabrina.
Thank you. I'm very excited to do this project all summer. Thank you.
We're excited too. Thanks for coming. And Molly?
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to spend some time with you this evening. I don't get to spend enough time with the city's boards and commissions. I try to visit 1 or 2 each year, and it's always a delightful experience for me to hear from you, to be able to maybe help you with some areas you have questions, and to offer a little bit of perspective on the sort of broader work that we do for the city. So maybe it makes sense for me to introduce myself for a moment. I'm Molly Stump. I am the city attorney. I've been in this role for coming up on 8 years now for the city of Palo Alto, and I've been a public lawyer my entire life. As a lawyer, I spent many years with the city of San Francisco doing a variety of projects for that city. And then the council did bring me on here 8 years ago. And we have a full-service in-house legal department on the 8th floor of this building. You're welcome to come and visit us. We have 8 lawyers and 3 non-lawyer staff. And we also work with outside counsel on specialized areas and litigation, defending litigation against the city. So I personally spend most of my time with the city council and the city manager, focusing on their policy priorities. But members of my team do work with all of the departments, including quite a bit of work with the Community Services Department, which in addition to supporting this commission, has a lot of other goals and tasks and responsibilities, programs and services that are very important to the city. So I took some time this afternoon just to, knowing I was going to come and visit with you here this evening, to read through again your sort of assignment language in our municipal code. And I was really struck by the breadth of the areas of responsibility and the importance of this commission. Not to pick favorites among one's children, I cannot imagine any set of issues that are as important to the fabric of this community as those that are charged to you to work on for the city. So thank you for your service. It's a big responsibility, and it's very important to the council and to the people of Palo Alto. So maybe just a couple of introductory comments, and then it may be that council members have, commissioners have questions and kind of comments, and we can have more of a dialogue. But I think, in talking with the staff, following up on your retreat, I think one theme is to help the commission understand how your particular work fits in with the work of the city as a whole. And of course, your council member liaison, Councilmember Woolbach, is helping you do that, as you go along with your work. But just a few comments from my perspective. So Palo Alto, of course, has a council manager form of government. And what that means is we are all on the same team. And I have to say, coming here from the city of San Francisco, that was a revelation and a great relief. San Francisco is a city and a county, and there are many elected officials embedded into city government. It's a very, very large organization, and it often feels like there are multiple competing teams and sub-teams there. That's not the case here. I don't report to the city manager, but the city manager and I both report to the council. So we really are aligned in the work that we're doing. The council, of course, sets policy and overall direction for the city, partly through adoption of the city's budget, which is one of its most important responsibilities, and then through all of the items that the council sees and provides input and direction to the city manager throughout the year. The city manager then directs the city's workforce, including the staff that supports this commission. And with some commissions, that can sometimes create a slightly awkward or a bit of tension, where the advisory commission has lots of ideas and interests you'd like to pursue, but you have really no dedicated staff. You have a portion of the time of some wonderful public servants who also have many other duties. And those duties are directed by the city manager, who is pursuing the overall goals and programs that were set for him or her, him in this case, by the city council. So one thing that advisory commissions need to be a little bit mindful of is not, in a sense, creating a tension in terms of directing the work of city staff in a way that may create an inconsistency or a difference in priority from what they're being directed to do, coming from the council to the manager to their department head, et cetera. And I know that's an area that you all may have found some tension around that, because you have a lot of energy and ideas, and you have a limited sort of administrative ability to kind of move forward with those, important as they are. So a lot of your work is done through being the council's eyes and ears in the community, being out there in the community, talking to folks, understanding what's going on, what is of concern, also expressing the council's priorities around diversity, inclusiveness, fairness, equity, which has been expressed in a variety of ways, and most recently through the council's resolution on inclusion. So there's a lot of work that you're able to do, and your ordinance really speaks to that. Talks about talking to folks, listening, exercising your ability to persuade, being the sort of access point for people and issues coming in and ultimately getting to the council. Any sort of concrete programs that would involve dedication of city resources or funds, of course, those come out of this commission as recommendations, because the commission, like all Palo Alto's boards and commissions, is advisory to the council. So I was just looking at your wonderful handbook. It's really quite extraordinary. And I think it covers kind of the key points about being an effective commissioner. be prepared, be respectful when you come, and engaged, and ask questions and offer opinions, and celebrate the fact that you will have differences of opinion and perspective. And hopefully you will often reach consensus or a group approach that brings those things together. Where it doesn't, you agree to disagree and move forward. You, of course, need to follow the Brown Act, and your staff will help you do that. We can answer any questions through the staff that may come up that are maybe more tricky than typical. And you are also very fortunate to have a council member liaison who is engaged with this commission and attends and knows what's going on and is a good and interested and dedicated council member, both to the issues that this commission is concerned with, and then also, with his fellow council members when they meet in this room. So I think I'll stop there. And how would you want to, or maybe the chair or the staff liaison has a thought about how you'd like to use our time together this evening?
I'd like to open it up to questions, if that's agreeable. Maybe we would each take a question and then turn it over to someone else, to the next person, so that we each have a chance. Is that okay? Okay. DePauli, would you like to start?
Yeah, no, thank you. That was a good introduction. I don't have any questions.
I'll pass as well. Go ahead.
Commissioner Lee?
I was wondering if you could provide some clarification regarding one of the areas where we have jurisdiction to make recommendations. I don't have the specific citation, but one of them references us making recommendations to council in terms of them taking a position on non-city legislation or other issues. Wondering if you could provide some clarification on that, because there's always an interesting philosophical debate about our specific focus and whether we should only focus on Palo Alto issues or city of Palo Alto issues, and what our role should be with respect to other issues within our shared community, but also just state, regional, federal, as it intersects with things of concern to people who live in Palo Alto.
Right, and thank you for raising that. That is an area of fair complexity. So I would expect that most of the time that you are having an interest in state or federal legislation, it's through the lens of how it affects the residents and citizens of this city. That's really where your charge is, and that will happen quite frequently. There's another layer of complexity because the city has a pretty now well-developed legislative program. And the council is the one that speaks for the city directly to our state and federal congressional and state legislative delegations about the city's overall position on legislation. The council does that in a variety of ways. There's a overall council legislative set of positions that the council revisits from time to time, I think about yearly, that has kind of settled positions that get adjusted each year, but some of them you'll recognize that we wish to promote local control on issues of local concern, those kinds of things. That gets done on a proactive basis before the state legislative term starts. And then, of course, as it is the case in Sacramento, as in Washington, lots of unexpected things happen through the year, and the council tries to respond to them very quickly. Sometimes we have to take action so quickly that the city manager will respond, and then we'll get back to the council as soon as possible. This commission, I noticed in your code, does have some ability to actually articulate positions, which is a little surprising, frankly, because again, we are all one city. But I think your code section says, and quite rightly, that if you were to do that, you would need to be clear that you're speaking as a commission and not on behalf of the city or the city council. So my suggestion to you would be if it's an area of legislation that's not one of those last-minute emergencies, but one where you are seeing something develop and you think the city ought to take a position on it, my suggestion would be to try to go through the city's regular legislative process. There is a staff person in the city manager's office who kind of vets things and tees it up for the city manager and then the council. And if you're able to make a recommendation to the council to take a position and then the council does that, I think that amplifies your voice potentially, because you could then get a letter coming from the city council signed by the city's mayor. And that's the kind of thing that the legislative analyst in Sacramento will, when they're analyzing a bill, they'll list for and against, and they would list then the city of Palo Alto. I suspect that a subsidiary commission may not make that list in the same way.
And typically, how much lead time should we allocate if and when those instances come up?
As much as possible. The council's agenda are very, very crowded, and I know you've experienced that. You're anxious to get your recommendations on the diversity and inclusion resolution, and I know Councilmember Wolbach is anxious for that as well. And you did your work, and you're queued up in the queue, and just towards the end of the legislative term in May and June, council was meeting even more than the once a week that they typically meet, and with agendas just packed with time-sensitive, deadline-driven matters. So as much time as you can provide, but we do have the ability to kind of jump onto the agenda relatively on short notice for a legislative item that has urgency.
And one follow-up question, if the chair wouldn't mind.
If it's related.
Yeah, it's related. So I know this commission makes recommendations on funding, and oftentimes the funding impacts students in our schools. And so there's been sort of a philosophical debate as to whether the city should play a role in providing funding for those services. I'm so wondering if you could provide any guidance on that.
Well, the city has a variety of programs and services that serve Palo Alto school children. And this is an area, I think, of concern and focus for the city manager and the city council, frankly, as both a desire to provide a certain set of services, but also needing to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And frankly, the city, even as good of economic times as we are in, the city is in a position where it's being extremely careful about its budget. So, I know that through the budget process, there's discussion about those kinds of items. I'm not sure how much value add, other than one of the challenges of, frankly, an advisory commission that focuses on an area of particular concern. Yours is broad, but it's still bounded. But when you get to the city council, you have all of the city services and requirements, including policing, including the storm drains and the electric power system and all of that. So there are trade-offs that are being made, frankly. You may see an issue as the highest of priorities amongst the things you're looking at, but then what the manager and the council have to do is to also put that together with all of the other needs that our residents have, all the services and programs that we provide. And the calculus may come out a little bit different.
So if both the city and the school district are funding a particular program that services students in the schools, is that something that is clearly within or outside our advisory role as a city commission?
It sounds like you have something specific in mind.
Well, I know that we provide funding for mental health services in the schools, and oftentimes there's a philosophical debate as to whether the city should put in its share or whether it should be fully paid for by the school district. And so I'm wondering if there's been any articulated philosophy on that from either the city council or the city manager.
Well, again, I think those are discussions that get explored between the city manager and the superintendent, and then the council members and the school board members. I think that those kinds of budget type issues and financially driven issues, you're probably not in the best position to add to that conversation, because you don't have the full picture of those budgets before you and the various diverse types of programs that may be going into a conversation there.
Okay.
I think maybe that's where my question comes in. We are an appointed body, but we are advisory. And I just kind of wonder where we are on a spectrum of governance, how much we can initiate, how much we can expect.
Right. So, I mean, you've just described it quite correctly, which is that you're an important body, and the city has provided a certain amount of resources to support your work. A lot of your work is really you jumping in and getting your hands fully in it as commissioners, because there just frankly isn't a depth of staff. As there would be in a larger city, there might be a small staff to support the HRC or the Commission on the Status of Women, et cetera, that you'd see that in larger cities. We just aren't ever going to have that. So you're doing a lot of that sort of work of talking to folks in the community, understanding community concerns, maybe doing some research. You're doing that work yourself, and thank you for that. You are advisory on policy matters, and so but the council wants to hear from you because you have more of an expertise, more time to delve into an area, and they will put weight on the things that you say. You are also a place for Palo Altans to come to express their concerns and to be more fully heard than perhaps they can be at the council, where we may be dealing with a land use issue, a bridge that needs to get built, water pipes that need to be repaired. And we don't have perhaps the time to dedicate as much as you do to these issues.
You gave an example, if you don't mind if I follow up. You gave an example of the Commission on Gender Equality, and I was going to react to that and say, but that's good work, that's fun work. I enjoy doing that. I wanted to think also about responsibility to communicate to the, is there a responsibility to communicate to the Commission when there's an incident in the community? Do we have a role to play in that chain of reaction and response?
Right, so I think it is about talking and input and discussion, and the commission is not in the chain of command, as it were, between the city council, the city manager, and say the chief of police, right? If there's an incident that may involve some policing aspect. There isn't a sort of obligation, and people may not even really fully think, oh, we should communicate or work with our HRC, because frankly, everyone is very busy in good faith doing the work of the citizens. So you might have to take a little initiative to get involved and to be out there talking to Palo Altans and engaging with the community, really fostering that community engagement piece as much as possible. I think when there's an interest in a dialogue, to the extent that it can happen. And I know it's not just this commission. I think all commissions can find it a little bit awkward talking as a multi-member body to another multi-member body. And this is local government for you, right? There's not an easy way. And that's part of the reason that many years ago, the council did set up a system of council member liaisons to commissions to try to facilitate that conversation. And you're fortunate that you have a council member who attends your meetings.
We know that. Thank you. Commissioner Ronan?
Thank you for being with us tonight, Molly. I wanted to revisit the issue you brought up about staff time. So there are times when we are interested in an issue, we might bring it up with Minka, she then has to escalate it up the chain. That takes some time. There are times when we're directed to run things past, for example, your office, and then sometimes it seems like it takes quite a while to really get a response. So can you give us some guidance on what things should we handle ourselves using our own judgment? What things do we really need to vet with your office? How much should we have to run things up the chain via Minka? Is there a number of times a year that would be appropriate to make those kinds of requests? Is there a time when it gets to be too excessive, too much of a burden on staff, and we should be cognizant of that? Could you comment on that?
I think I can comment in a general way, Commissioner. There's not a set number of times, but I think you're correct in identifying there that you have to prioritize. You will have more ideas and initiatives than there is staff capacity and council capacity to address. So it does make sense for you to focus on the ones that you feel are most particularly important and where you can make a concrete impact. I would do those sort of first. In terms of what issues need to be worked through to Minka's supervisors and managers, or even to my office, I think Minka is the best person to give you that advice on an issue-by-issue basis. I think she would bring issues to my office if they involved certainly city contracts or agreements, any financial items, any potential liability, city liability, or sometimes the city does new programs and services that can create risk, and we certainly do that with our eyes wide open when the right folks, typically the manager or the council, decide that that's a risk worth taking. But it does need an evaluation then and a definition of that through the legal office. Yeah. So I think we really have to work that on a case by case. And I'll just sort of say generally that I wish that we had the resources to be sort of immediately on call for all of your initiatives, and I know that we don't. So we're doing our best.
I don't have a question at the moment. I will pass.
I want to go back to Commissioner Lee's question around the funding part. Since there is a significant part of our work every other year that we're dealing with grants and those things, it sounds, where do we get the right guidance to know if we're wasting our time? So he's asking a question on the Board of Ed, and if the city manager and stuff, and we spend hours going through and vetting these grants and making those recommendations, is that really a good use of the council's, of this commission's time? Or is there a way that we can vet these concerns before we start dealing with the grants?
I think what both commissioners are referring to is all the applications are from community service type organizations, and they are responding to priority of needs. So the audience for what these grants serve are a variety of members of the community, and one is specifically funding a service on the school district campus. And there has been a concern of the commission for a while. For a while, we were paying more for the service than the school district was by significant portions. And the provider of that service left, and then the new provider of the service asked for substantially more. They received $30,000 when the old grantee was getting $100,000. But there still lies a concern has been with staff, and that was with, when Rob DeGos was our director, that was a great concern of his and members of the commission that were on the committee, and it's already passed on to the new commissioners as well, is the responsibility of the city paying for a service that should be fully funded by the school district. I'm not sure if there's many other communities that pay for mental health services on the campus. So this started with the history of the city helping to found adolescent counseling service in the early years when the school district wasn't able to, and it just slowly over the years went to the large level that it is. Right. So we're kind of in this situation. It's kind of a history situation. So, but I think what the commissioners are referring to is there a question that the city is concerned about of paying for services on school campuses? And as Molly said, there's in the recreation department, I mean, the city fully runs the middle school athletic program. The city brokers all the fields on all the school district campuses. So there are a variety of services that the city already provides to the school district. Some are paid by fees, some are not paid by fees. And that's a process that I know has been monitored by the executive leadership team of the city. And I can't speak to any further details. And I believe the council might have had conversations about this in the past. So I don't believe there's ever been a philosophical decision, no, we won't do so. And if that's something the commission feels strongly about. Before, it was a huge reduction in the request. That was something that was going to be elevated to Jim Keene, and then I want to say Kevin Skelly, but Max McGee. And then that need did not happen because of the new request. So that's what they're speaking to. I see.
The background is helpful. So you're not alone. There are a number of services, and really does speak to the historical close relationship between the city and the school district, both government entities, of course, greatly contributing to the quality of life in our town, and we're very supportive of our school children. However, we also would like the school district to be responsible for as many things as it can, because we have competing needs, as you're referencing, for our various pots of money. So I think it would be perfectly fine when you make your recommendations if you wanted to include a note, that you have recommended funding this activity, which has been funded in the past, but it would be really wonderful to see more of that responsibility shifted to the school district, because there are other competing needs for those dollars. That might be one way to handle it if you have a concern about that, but still wish to make the recommendation to do the funding.
That's actually how it went through last time, before Adolescent Counseling Service actually pulled the request for the money, and that triggered the whole two HISRAP processes last year. But the committee, of which Commissioner Onan and the other two commissioners are no longer here. They did include that. You're on the second committee, but not the first one.
Yeah. And would the commission be able to make the opposite recommendation as well,
To not fund the services?
No, if we felt like the city did have a role to play in funding those services, as opposed to saying, we're going to fund it this year, but we'd like the school district to take on more of the burden? Could we do the opposite recommendation?
Sure. It's my understanding that HISRAP is before you for your input.
Right. So it goes first to a subcommittee, then to full commission, and that recommendation goes to finance.
Okay.
So it's ultimately the council's decision, but the majority of the time, they follow through with the HRC's recommendation. The only thing that they sometimes have conversations for is the funding amount.
Okay, so there hasn't been any previous guidance as to how we should be thinking of that particular issue?
No, there has not.
Okay.
Yeah, and not as a categorical matter. So again, you're going to need to have that debate yourselves, and it sounds like there's a diversity of views, which is appropriate. So best of luck to you. I think that you are advisory, and the council, as Mika said, can make a different decision, but they do put a lot of weight on what this commission recommends.
Commissioner Crail?
Yeah, I heard that there was a new city manager, so I wondered if, being a veteran city attorney, if you could comment on your thoughts about bringing on a new city manager and how that is going to change the mission of the city in whatever respect as it would affect this commission as you can perceive it.
Sure. Well, let me not be cagey, so I'll offer a couple comments. So first, the legal part, which is that there isn't a new city manager today. Our current city manager, Jim Keene, has indicated that he'll be retiring at the end of the calendar year. And the council has then identified and indicated that our current assistant city manager, Ed Shikata, is their choice to then become city manager in January. So he's currently on our staff as the utilities general manager and assistant city manager, and he'll be then moving to the city manager position in January. And that, from my perspective, as one of the city's executive leaders, is really good news that the council engaged with that process timely to really make a clear direction for us as city staff and for the community about how the city is going to move forward and build on the great work that Jim Keene has done for 10 years as a city manager. Ed Chicata is a fabulously dedicated and talented public servant, and I've greatly enjoyed working with him as assistant city manager. So I think he'll be a different city manager, but more in terms of perhaps style and emphasis. The basic mission of the city, which I think you asked about, it remains to serve the citizens as that is expressed, the priority and direction are expressed from our city council, and that will continue, I think, unchanged.
Well, actually, I think that covers most of it. I'll just emphasize that in my view, and if others disagree, please offer alternative views. And the way I see it is that the city council has two main roles, primary being policy direction and the secondary, but also important is oversight. Because once you get past policy direction, you get into the implementation of that policy. And the city manager, along with the other council-appointed officers, the city clerk, city auditor, and the city attorney, and all of the staff, the 1,000+ staff below them, the city staff from the highest level down, handle implementation. And so when it comes to what the policy direction is, the change in city manager should not, in general, have a substantial impact in what the policy direction is of the city, because that's set by the council. So there may be changes in the council makeup after the next year, but this change in city manager should not substantially impact that. Again, as each city manager will have their own style to a certain degree, that may change how they go about the implementation. And the city manager also, like the city attorney, the other council-appointed officers, and our boards and commission, play an important role in providing their professional advice to the council. And so to the degree that the city manager provides guidance based on their experience, that will be an advisory role to the council. But our policy direction still does come from the council.
I wanted to follow up with a specific question, but I'm more interested in the general answer. You mentioned the council resolution, and one of the topics we were looking at was immigration, and we specifically had a recommendation to, or we still have a recommendation to endorse the state legislation on one level to just endorse it, but then also to write a letter to the state Senate to say that we were supportive of that, and that becomes an issue in this environment. And I think we probably used every process, going first to the city attorney, then hoping that we would have a recommendation that would go to you after it was approved. Just wonder what the right route the most efficient route would be if we had a subsequent piece of legislation we wanted to recommend endorsing.
So your question is, so you could weigh in on legislation when it's been introduced but hasn't been passed yet, or in that case that was enacted legislation, and your recommendation is to thank the legislature and to endorse also that policy.
Yeah, by the time we had our recommendations completed, the state legislation, SB 53, was actually two levels, the immigration and the religious registry were passed. But we wanted to recommend that the city of Palo Alto go on record as saying we are supportive of that, acknowledge that there are perhaps downsides, but we really felt it was important to endorse that. And I think we did this in so many different ways, I'm getting confused. I think our first recommendation was to take it to the city attorney's office, and then subsequently we thought, well, maybe we could have those questions answered by one of the attorneys and submit it as a formal recommendation. So I guess the question was, do we come to you before or after the recommendation is put to council?
So when your recommendations are getting ready to go to council, the workflow will bring them through my office. So if it's complex or controversial, or it's not clear whether it's within the city's authority, it's good to ask Minka to do a quick check with us, and we can do that on the phone, just to make sure you're on the right track and you don't spend time kind of off in a direction that we're not permitted to go. This is a perfectly permissible recommendation that you've made. It's just a question of having the time to get it onto the council's agenda. I have looked at it, Minka has looked at it, so she looks at it first and then it comes to me, and that will go to the council this fall. And, you know, I don't have a vote on the council, but I'd be surprised if they weren't supportive of that recommendation.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question that is slightly related to that? I think what the commission sometimes struggles with is what to do with what they hear. So they have the authority to have a public forum on an issue that they're concerned about. They know they have the authority to send something to the council to say, can you please have a policy related to XYZ issue, or can you please pass a resolution for XY issue? So, and I've said there's also a level of just being able to provide the council with an informational report on something that they're interested in, or even on a quarterly basis going and speaking at oral communications. So I think at least the more veteran members realize that those are kind of 4 areas of action. I think what would be helpful, and this may not be completely in your scope of work, but at what point should they pass it on to the council? At what point have they done enough research, or if staff is able to assist them, enough research to say, yes, we think the council should consider this policy? I mean, how far along should they go before they're probably past the depth of their, understanding of an issue? So is there any guidance that Councilmember Wolbach or you can give them, Molly? But there's to a point where they say, we could talk about this some more. Let's get some more experts in here to talk to us. But is it to a point where we really are committed to this issue? This is much. We know this is what we think is a reasonable recommendation. Maybe their recommendation to council is to see if council has an interest in something, to actually have council have the city manager direct regular staff to actually look into it some more. So that's really, I think, a fuzzy area to them, is what is far enough or too far for them, and at what point they should let something go on to council.
You may have some thoughts on this. I think one area where it bears being very thoughtful before forwarding a recommendation is if you're imagining a new type of city service or activity that actually is going to require funding and ongoing staffing. Because we really haven't been in the mode of, greatly expanding our services just for practical reasons. So that's a big ask. And to the extent that you can address your concerns using public-private partnerships, using nonprofit groups that are in the community, and what you'd be asking for would be more of a policy and endorsement from council, that's a smaller ask. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that whether it is a a recommendation to take a position on a piece of legislation, or a recommendation to have a change in policy and how we implement things using the existing staff, or a recommendation to create a new service, when it's going to require, when you feel that you're ready to make the recommendation, even at a high level, I think it's okay to make that recommendation, have it, and say we're going to send this off to council, especially if it's something that's going to require a lot of staff work, because ultimately a lot of staff work is going to be resource intensive by definition, and that kind of direction is going to need to come from council, or we're going to have to say we endorse and we direct the city staff to spend those time resources on that issue. So especially if you're talking about something complex or something substantially new, I'd say send it to the council with the recommendation, that we would direct staff to do it, right? That we would adopt the new policy or the new program. Then we can hear the general direction you're going, and we can have a discussion about whether that's something we want to have staff spend a lot of time on. And if it's something where we say that's a great idea and needs to be fleshed out more, we might direct staff to check in again, maybe once more or periodically with the commission for further development of the details. Excuse me,
Following up with that, is there a particular type or amount of legwork that would be inappropriate for us to do before sort of the council endorses something? So you mentioned public-private partnerships or working with other agencies or nonprofits in the city. If we had an idea to do X and we were trying to identify potential partners in the community or potential resources in the community, is it proper for either the commission as a whole to go out and reach out to those folks, or individual commissioners to do that kind of legwork prior to either the commission or the council saying, yes, this is a priority, we'd actually want to do something about it? So are there any parameters as to what we can't do as a commission or individual commissioners in terms of doing some of that legwork so that we're not burdening staff time?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's sort of more of an art than a science. I would think part of getting it right would be being clear in your preliminary conversations with, say, interest groups who are working in an area. You don't want to confuse folks that you're speaking for the whole commission or even for the whole city when you're speaking with them, but you can say, hey, what if we were to, would you be interested in blah, 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 if the city were to move in this direction, so that people are aware that these are preliminary exploratory conversations. But I think if you're able to do that and then come forward with some concrete practical suggestions on how to move forward on an issue, that would be very welcome by council.
Okay.
Do you have anything to add?
I think that's for me, it's just being very clear that people are speaking either as an individual commissioner or not on behalf of the city, exactly what you said, or not leading people to believe that something is further along than it actually is. And to be honest, I would add to it, I'd be very concerned of going pretty deep into something if that is not a consensus of the HRC that that's something the commission wants to be involved with, so that it's just the interest of one commissioner, because that could really, I think, impair relationships with partners if they have the idea that something may be pending when it's just a curiosity of a particular commissioner. So that's another area I'd have to add.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it's a wise comment. People come to want to have these positions, and you are chosen to have these positions because you have particular interest and background and skills. And you keep those, right, even once you're serving, but now you're also a government official. And in some ways, that may cause you to have to moderate a little bit, maybe be a little bit more deliberative and a little slower in your advocacy. I have seen folks come onto multi-member bodies, citizen advisory commissions, for example, who were very passionate about an issue and ended up feeling like there was too much tension between the positions they wanted to take, which they wanted to be very strong in advocacy, versus being on the body, needing to work for government, it just was too different. And so they've said, I don't want that government position. So I do think once you take this on, you are, in a sense, now you are speaking for the community as a whole. You do have your particular knowledge and background and interest. You don't lose those, but you do need to come together and act as a body as well.
Right, thank you for that clarification. I know I make it clear when I meet with folks, whether it's something I'm working on or just interested in, or whether it's the commission's working on it, so it's great to get that clarification.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
We are about to wrap up. Are there any last questions, commissioners?
Quick question. So you just mentioned when we speak or communicate with people, we need to be a little bit more thoughtful, moderate. I'm new, so I'm very careful. Actually, I'm a little bit nervous about using the different language or send out the email. So what's the right approach to communicate with people when we participate specific activities? For example, you mentioned we cannot use randomly use the HRC to speak for our own opinion, right? So I would like to hear some advice or guidance.
So one thing that it's okay to do is to identify yourself as an HRC commissioner when you're speaking to folks in the community. You can say, introduce yourself, give your name, and say, I serve on the Human Rights Commission. And then you can have your conversation. If there are particular questions that are concerning you about going to a particular meeting or doing a particular activity, I think in the beginning, especially when you're new, the staff will welcome a call and will be able to give you some quick feedback. You have an experienced staff liaison who can help you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this question, I clearly identify myself as the pastor of a church, and I do take stands based on that role. Do I need to preface statements now as this is also not the opinion of the HRC? Because I can preface the statement if it's something controversial or something I have to take a stance on for the church.
Well, certainly not in the work that you're doing with the members of your organization or with other folks in the faith community. But if it has to do with a city program,
Okay.
yeah, that might be where you'd want to be clear.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Just to weigh in briefly on this same item, this is something we deal with on the city council as well, and I think it's an important question. If you are, or if we are on the council, are identifying ourselves as a member of the city council when we're introducing ourselves, or signing a letter, or an email, or being introduced at an event, and then proceed to express our own personal views, at that point, I think it's important that we say, speaking for myself. And you'll find that you'll notice when I'm speaking to you, even as the council liaison, I'll often preface my opinions and views by saying, speaking only as one member of the council, just to be very clear that even as a member of the council, I cannot speak for the council as an entirety, that we can only speak as a body by taking a vote and having a majority decision. In the same way, I really encourage members of the commission to meet with people in the community as a member of the commission, and find opportunities to be our eyes and ears on the issues that you are tasked with supporting us and supporting the city on, to meet with members of the community as individuals, or as, with individuals, with groups, identifying yourself as a member of the HRC, primarily to listen. And if you offer opinions, to say, speaking only as one member of the commission, or separately from my position on the commission, just as a person, as a resident, as a pastor, or as an attorney, or whatever. And of course, what you can do in addition to that is to encourage people to participate in the more formal mechanisms where the commission and the city hear from them as well, besides individual meetings and private meetings, to encourage them to come to forums and programs hosted by the HRC or co-hosted by the HRC, to come to HRC meetings and speak during public comment on particular items or in general, or to have their voices heard directly by the council at council meetings or through written communications to the council. So I really do encourage you to use your role to identify yourself in pursuit of collecting more community input about these important issues, and not to be hesitant to do that, especially when you're focusing on listening and encouraging members of the public to participate.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. I appreciate it. If you have any closing comments, you've shared a lot with us, and I'm really appreciative.
I am very appreciative of having the time to come and speak with you, share some thoughts, and thank you for your work. It's a little bit of a difficult time, and I think the work that you're doing is particularly important to this community and to all of us right now. So thank you.
I really appreciate that coming from you particularly. Okay.
Thank you, Molly.
Okay, we will move on to agenda item 3. I'd like to begin with something that we had worked through at our retreat. We had meeting norms for the retreat, and I've adapted them slightly for our commission meetings. And I think you all have them in front of you. I'm just going to take a second to read them: to respect other people's responses, to have clarity regarding and to stay focused on our role or jurisdiction, which Molly has helped us with, to stick to our scope, that is a Palo Alto-related lens, to put forward concrete ideas, and those concrete ideas would be prepared having read the material that was distributed, to model civil discourse, active listening, receptive posture, being issue-focused, using factual data, not anecdotal, think before speaking, constructive suggestions. A reminder, 51% is a winning vote. Once a decision is made, we support it. And then finally, friends, cell phones off, put away. And we will be a self-administering body and help each other manage to our norms. And now I'd like to ask you to look at the materials that are at places. There are several pieces. One piece is the work plan for FY 2019. And that's just a summary of what we have on our plates already. I just want to emphasize as we go forward to think about what we'd like to add, that we have already 3 program areas that are going forward. One of them will be completed at Q1, but gender identity and gender equity will be big programs that will probably go through for 4 quarters. We have 2 funding cycles, 5 liaison and commitments and council buddies. I'm excited to take on some new work, and we usually have a balance of old and new, but I also think we need to be cognizant of how much we can do in our volunteer time and extra time. I think the first thing I wanted to do is thank you for participating in the retreat and in the follow-up materials. We had 100%, each of us filled out the rating scales, and admittedly, they could have been more deliberative, and there's some refinement needed, but I'm going to ask that we hold any suggestions about the rating experience, about the matrices, to later in the year. I think it worked well enough for this first time out that we can focus now on what priority we'd like to formalize and look at more deeply. So with that, I'm going to ask you to turn to these 2 sheets, HRC new projects for consideration. There were 16 priorities that we listed on the retreat day, and Nancy captured them. Some of us may have questions about how well they were captured, or if we had had more time, we might have collapsed them and combined them in different ways. But I chose not to edit them and circulated them for your review as we captured them at the retreat. So I'd like to take each proposal one by one, and I'll give an example. One proposal that was put forth was to create an HRC liaison position with PAUSD. And when we weighted the points that each of us gave to that, that received 41 points. That was the highest. And so we're going to start with that. I'll ask Commissioner Lee in just a second to make a quick kickoff statement. And then we as a group will decide whether that's something we have the staff has the capacity for, whether the commission has the capacity for, and whether it's something we'd like to give to a subcommittee to beef it up and bring it back to us in September. So let's take these potential new projects one by one and see which ones we want to add on. Is that okay? Okay. Commissioner Lee?
Yeah, so I think the most recent school renaming debate, as well as just issues that have been lingering in the community, have raised an interest at the school district level to establish some sort of body or point person at the district who could work on these issues, on the same sorts of issues that the HRC does, but at the school district level. I attended one of the last school board meetings of the year, and the school board did ask the superintendent to go back and think about what sort of structure, whether it's a body or a committee or staff person who would work on it. So I think for now, if we wanted to set up a liaison between the HRC and the school district, it would be, just making sure that we keep in touch with them as they figure out for themselves what sort of format or body they would want to establish to discuss and tackle these sort of issues that we're tackling at a city level. And then depending on what they end up setting up, we can come back and reevaluate whether we feel like we have a value add to it and whether we have the bandwidth to support those joint efforts.
I did have one question. You asked that we have a liaison position with PAUSD. Is the intent that we would be a liaison with PAUSD or with the HRC committee that the school district is proposing?
I think I would initially propose that it be to someone in the superintendent's office, and if once they figured out what sort of body or who they want to designate to take on these responsibilities, then we can come back and reevaluate whether we want to change the nature of that liaison position to communicate primarily with that person or that body that they set up.
I want to direct a question towards staff. Have we ever had any historic association with the Palo Alto School District? What was the success of it? Because as we go, because it would seem to me, with all the integration that Molly talked about and you guys talked about funding and different things, it's surprising to me that there was never this kind of dialogue before.
Right. I mean, on a staff level, I mean, the city is working with the school district on, numerous fronts. I would say probably, when there's issues of fields going on, there might be someone from the school district staff that comes to our Park and Recreation Commission. There is a committee called the City School Liaison Committee, which has 2 staff members and 2 Board of Eds. So when there are issues that are, pardon? 2 council members. That's what I meant to say, thank you. 2 Board of Ed, 2 council members. So they meet on monthly, maybe every 2 months, to talk about issues together. To be honest, I feel pretty uncomfortable with the HRC establishing a liaison relationship with PAUSD. you are the elected body of the city council of the city of Palo Alto, and you don't have any kind of advisory or legislative authority over the school district, and I have a concern that that seems way too broad. Now, is it fine for if the school district offers, creates an HRC type body, that you have a collegial relationship, you know, on the topics that go on? I think that's fine. I think continuing to work with the school district, just as you work with the libraries or any type of nonprofit in the community together on events. But I do have a concern if it's HRC liaison in the superintendent's office. For me, I think it would have to be pretty specific for something that is in the very clear nexus of responsibilities of the commission. And if Councilmember Walbach has anything to add, he doesn't have to, obviously, but that's a concern of mine. It seemed to me, when I saw it written the way it does, it's set off a couple of concern light bulbs for me.
So would you be less concerned if it was more of to our analogous body at the school district, if and when and whatever they say? Okay.
I think that would be completely appropriate to share the knowledge and experience of those two groups together. I would be concerned if that body, because that body will also be a recommending body to the Board of Education. So I would have a concern if one of our commissioners was a voting member of something that was going back to the Board of Ed, but to maybe serve as like a non-voting collaborative relationship, I think that would be appropriate. I'm not sure if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think that listening to this conversation, I think you're heading down now probably a safer and more effective path. One thing I'm thinking about is how it would actually work, right? Would a member of this body sit in on their meetings? Would a member of that body then sit in on these meetings, you know, with me as a liaison? Would you propose, like the council and the Board of Education have a separate liaison committee? Would you be proposing that the HRC and the school district, future equivalent to the HRC, have their own parallel liaison committee? I don't have a strong recommendation among those, but you might want to think about sending it up the chain to council and respectively, you know, maybe we ask the school board as well to approve and formalize whatever that relationship might be. Until it's formalized, of course, again, you know, individuals are free to reach out to school board members, because I think anyone on this commission is a constituent of the school board, but in their own way.
I want to keep the discussion at a sort of a high plane for now, so I'm going to make this recommendation that we rewrite this to say create an HRC non-voting liaison position to an analogous body at PAUSD.
Chairman Stinger, could we rephrase it in that we're watching the situation and we have somebody just check in to see how their body is developing?
And that's what I was going to put for the action item, was that we ask somebody to watch, and that person would be responsible for presenting options for that connection to go forward. Yeah. What I will ask each of you to do before we leave tonight is indicate which topics you're interested in, and then we'll make the assignments. I'm going to move on, trying to stay again at that top level, but we will assume that that is something that we are looking at. I'll put that note. Another priority was proposed to develop a format for the HRC community conversations and to host 3 conversations that have wide appeal. And I'd like to speak to that. I think we've had community, I think this actually folds in a number of the proposals from below, and it allows us to tailor something that's unique to Palo Alto. We have technology that I think we can get some different approaches. We have some content issues that are suggested here. Some of the things we talked about at our retreat were focusing on what does it mean to be inclusive, what is racism today, how do you bridge the generation gap when you're new to America. We have topics here of equity, gender equity, different readings. I think we could put together a committee to look at doing a format that would be increase community awareness, be fun, and challenge people. So I would like to propose that we do that.
So Chair Stinger, what are you effectively looking as a way to make these events a lot easier? So are you looking to create, for lack of better words, a type of formula? Like if we do certain events a year, it'll either be speaker forum, this forum, this forum. Because what we've tended to do in the past is the HRC has had a lot of these events, and some of the elements are the same, some are similar, but I think for staff it would be easier if there was some kind of streamlined, template to use that, if it strays past the template, maybe that's not the resources we have to do. Maybe we do one. Maybe the HRC does one kind of out-of-the-box event, and the other ones, the topics and the format stick pretty strictly to the template. So that's just my observation as staff, which would probably, that's where I think would be helpful for the conversation to lie. So if something comes forward, we could say, does it fit in our template with the amount of staff time or HRC time that it would take to put this on? Should it be our special event, special different event of the year, or are they all going to fit in the template? And so that not every topic that comes to us, we have to think, oh, how are we going to do this? And I think that would be pretty time efficient.
You used the word that I wanted to use was template. I think that the community would benefit from knowing what they were coming to, and some repetition of methodology would be beneficial for the community and for staff and the commission.
2 points, Chair, is when we were at the retreat, there were other towns that do a similar activity. I believe Mountain View was the one. Why don't we ask them what they do? It works. Why reinvent the wheel?
Well, we've done that, but for a variety of reasons, my colleagues here and past colleagues just couldn't really couldn't really see how to translate it for Palo Alto. I have to admit I didn't fully agree with that, but yeah, Mountain View has a great format called Civility Roundtable, and I definitely think that we could take a lot of learnings from them.
I think of the difference, Commissioner Smith, is that very intentionally sets up a statement. And the topics is like, could Ferguson happen here, or something similar to that, to try to get two very opposing points. And that might be the three types of conversations you want to have. What I've seen more with this HRC, and you all can make it different, is it was more of kind of, the domestic violence, the implicit bias, the Veteran Summit was more of a sharing of information. It was more of a community conversation on a kind of a wider topic that wasn't set up to be, I'm not saying not controversial, but it wasn't
confrontational.
It was a little confrontational. That one seems to ask for people to be on two sides of the room, where the HRC events have more been about, this is an issue our community is struggling with, or our community may not know is there. Domestic violence was perfect. I think the tagline was, it does happen here. So it had a little bit different purpose. I do think that there is definite worth in looking at templates that other communities have used. I The Civility Roundtable is a great program, and if Palo Alto wants to do it, staff will definitely support it. But we just need to be understanding of the type of events that this commission would like to support and what kind of templates best supports that.
Thank you so much. I really do believe that we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There's somebody in the Bay or in this country that has this thing worked out. So I think we can find a template. The second part is we had a recommendation of doing some community polling to find out. I think it was the first thing on the ones that didn't get through. It was the one that scored 34. Maybe using that to get some of the topics, because we all have our own biases, our own blinders, our own preferences. And whether it's social media, email, whatever, just asking the community, what's a topic you wanted to discuss, even if it's only one of the 3 meetings in the year.
That's what I thought would be pretty fun if the HRC had, through its experience, had a couple, and then put something on the city's Facebook page or some type of on Nextdoor. Hey, if the HRC wants to do one more, what would you like to see?
I just didn't, I'm a baseball fan, so ties usually go to the runner, and it says minimum of 34, and since that was my idea, I appreciate that note. Thank you.
I just want to note that the ones that scored beneath 34 almost universally fold into topics above, and so I think we're going to see a lot more adoption.
And I'll volunteer to be the champion for this, because I do believe having community discussion spaces are critical.
Great, we'll note that down. I want to try one more to see if we think we have bandwidth to take on one more. And I know my colleague is going to say 2 more, and that's good too. One of the ideas was to partner with or communicate with the tech industry to co-support policies and decisions. Gender equity, gender identity might be one. Did you want to talk to that, or?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that particular idea these last couple of weeks, and I'm wondering if an easier way for us to approach that might be just to set up a round table of like diversity officers in the various companies who work in Palo Alto, and not necessarily have a specific project in mind, but just set up I wouldn't even call it an advisory body, because it wouldn't necessarily be that formal, but just convene these people occasionally, just so that we know that we all exist and that we're all sort of working on these issues together, so that when opportunities do arise, we have those connections already, and we can maybe learn best practices or find opportunities of joint effort. I don't know. That was some of my initial thoughts on that. But.
Yeah, my experience with people at that level is that they're very busy and they're very focused on their company, and they're often not that plugged into or connected with the larger community. I think without a specific goal or project or time frame in mind, it would be hard to convene that number of busy people at some regular interval just to kind of get together and connect. It would have to be focused on something. We could do like a one-time event and maybe invite some of these folks to be panelists, like a discussion panel. But again, time limited, very specific, and we'd have to really like sell the idea to them, and their company would have to probably endorse it or understand it or give them the time to participate. So it's a little bit more complicated.
Yeah. Would you recommend that we come with a set goal in mind, or in that first meeting see if there's something that the group collectively comes up with in terms of what they want to work towards?
Well, I think we should not go vague to them. We should go to them and say, hey, we're really concerned about the lack of gender equity in Silicon Valley, and there have been some, a lot of really negative press around companies like Uber for example. And, we know your company's really working on these issues. Would you like to have a community forum with us and really talk about what your efforts are? So in other words, it's a chance for them to kind of share what they're doing. That's a buy-in for them, because it's like, okay, I'm going to just differentiate my company from some of the companies that are not getting such great press, and now I will have a chance to explain the great efforts and strides that we are making. And then, we could talk about the challenges that still remain. So we could also partner with like Stanford professors, people who are sending their students out into this world and talk about gender equity problems in academia, and then how that feeds into the lanes that women and other underrepresented minorities get tracked into in tech. So there's different things we could do. We have to kind of make it attractive to them in some way, because they're going to spend their time.
Yeah.
They want to go there and look bad. Like, my company's an epic fail. Thanks for letting me share that in public. That's not going to work. So I do think we'll have to frame it, sell it, make it attractive, get the press there. So those companies are like, yeah, we're forerunners in this, we're pioneers and doing the best, we're on the edge on this.
I really like that. Thank you. Yeah.
Not to be the contrarian, but it sounds like we're trying to invent a trap for something that we haven't found yet. I think if we had an issue that we could engage the tech companies on and have a track record to say, hey, this is what we're doing, it would be instantly attractive to pull them into that. But to your point, I think to get diversity heads that get probably 10 to 15 invitations a quarter to speak places, to come and sit with us on a new venture, I just don't see us pulling them in and really getting them to gather around it. So, yeah, that's just a thought.
Without getting too deep into the weeds, because I know we're trying to keep it high level, I think our gender equity work, if and when the council decides to let us do something about it, that might be one possible topic within the umbrella of topics that we talk about as a commission, where we could engage these folks.
Yeah, I would almost suggest waiting for direction, because I would, hate for these organizations to think that we are trying to inform or dictate policies into their private organizations. So I think that was a concern of mine when I saw it the way it is, co-support policies and decisions, and I think that's really, something I would wait for the council's direction on. And if the council does decide to go forward with CDAW, then I would look forward how the council decides to, implement that.
Well, and I was originally thinking about it in a softer way, of more of just sharing best practices and knowledges. I mean, there's certainly a potential to go stronger on that, but at least initially, my thought was to be like more collaborative and just sharing best practices.
Right, and I think it might be the cart in front of the horse if you have this conversation and the council, like I says, goes forward with CDAW, and they have five key priorities or 3 key priorities, and that's not one of them. It seems like it's this interesting co-process. So that was my concern when I saw it.
Maybe it's something we could just investigate and have some ideas on if and when the council decides that this is something that we should work on? Should do some of the research, or?
Yeah, I think we could do that. Also, to revisit my idea about maybe leveraging Stanford, because a project that sort of falls under this umbrella would be to invite someone like Cynthia Lee, who teaches computer science at Stanford and talks a lot about the lack of gender equity. My colleague, Commissioner Smith, knows of her as well. That might be an effective way to launch a conversation and, getting some publicity around that. And then maybe we can build on that and then reach out to people in tech and say, hey, we talked to a Stanford professor around these issues, and here's where we are. And so do you want to come and share what your company's doing about this? And then that will tend to get people a little bit more interested in participating.
I would almost recommend that we look at partnering with Cynthia Lee, because she's trying to do a conference around a lot of these issues this year. So maybe in this approach, we say, hey, let's have a conversation with her and see how we can come alongside and partner with her, because I know she's very passionate about this work.
And with her contacts, that might give us a segue into some of these other ideas that you have, Commissioner Lee, without us having to start from scratch. I mean, we might be able to build on the relationship we established. And then we'll have a partnership both with Stanford and possibly with representatives from Tech. So, that's a real synergy that we could use.
I really like that idea of combining those two. I looked at this, and I guess I didn't read it thoroughly enough, but I looked at it as an opportunity to pick some brains with our LGBTQ listening forum, for example. There's some recommendations, and I thought having access to some diversity officers, not necessarily on a panel, but one by one, could help us understand the issues in the workforce and the validity of the recommendations that we might come forward with. And so if we could build that relationship.
I think it might be a useful tool or strategy that we could incorporate in different things that we do, whether it's an LGBTQ assessment or an event, or, I see it as having fingers in multiple areas and not necessarily just a standalone by any means.
For right now, can we combine those two, and we'll allow a subcommittee to work on making that a more, to give some foundation and some definition?
So putting it under the Cynthia Lee one?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Commissioner, Co-Chair Onan, would you like to talk about researching ADA standards?
Yes, thank you, Chair Stinger. So my idea for this project is a little bit different from some of the other projects that we will be discussing tonight. It comes from a place of personal passion for me. So a few years ago, I became very disabled by inflammatory arthritis that destroyed my hip joints, and for a while, I really couldn't walk. At that time, I experienced Palo Alto in a new way as a disabled person, and I was very dismayed to find that Palo Alto is not a very accessible community when you are truly disabled. And as I was fortunate enough to at least partially recover. I rode my bike here tonight, so, which is a big journey for me. But other people are not as lucky, and we do have a very large and growing population of seniors, and that population tends to have more mobility issues, more disabilities. So what I'm finding is, although the city complies with the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, it complies the minimum standards, which is great, but those minimum standards are maybe not realistic for this community. I think this community might need to start thinking about exceeding those standards in order to truly serve the needs of the people who live here. But I'd like to look into this a little bit more. I'd like to understand the law better. I'd like to talk to people on the city staff who are in charge of complying with those laws. I'd like to get a little more data on the demographics of the people who live here, and then come back to you with some kind of report and possibly make some recommendations to the full commission, and then see if we want to either send a report on to council with some recommendations or pass some sort of resolution, maybe meet with individual council members to educate them around this issue if that's appropriate. And I think those are next steps that we'll kind of have to figure out. But for now, I think this project would largely fall on my shoulders to go and do some groundwork to kind of figure out where we are in terms of the law, our compliance, our ability to maybe do more than what the law requires, and whether that's necessary, because I can't build everything on my personal anecdotal experience, obviously. So this would be something I would be working on sort of as a research project, and then I would bring it back to you all to get your opinions and see where we want to go from there.
My only initial, sorry.
Well, I just wanted to second that. I know at the retreat I talked about the fact that I now have some hip issues, and it is a different lens, and I think you're very right that there are minimum standards, and then there's sort of practical reality, and I think transportation is one that I would hope that you could focus on. Even simple things like trying to get into a vehicle when you have arthritis. Sometimes you can't get in on, the right side. You have to get in on the left side, depending on, what ails you. And I do think that when we are trying to attract people to the city, to take advantage of the city services, transportation is absolutely key to the elder population who is stopping driving and may have physical issues. And so I just would like to say I applaud that interest, and I think transportation would be one area that I would hope could be covered. Thank you.
My initial suggestion would be, somewhere down the road, I think there might be possible collaborations with the Planning and Transportation Commission, whether it's us giving them a presentation or having a joint discussion with them, but I see potential for some sort of collaboration down the road. So that would be my initial suggestion.
Yeah. That may be possible. I think we've already suggested, Minka and Valerie have already suggested working with the senior-friendly, dementia-friendly city subcommittee that we already have, because some issues regarding disabled people will overlap with the issues facing that subcommittee. So again, I'm hoping to start making connections and contacts and interview and talk to the right people and kind of see where that takes me. I don't think Minka has.
I said, that's exactly what I was going to suggest, because I saw you were listed as the new liaison to the age-friendly committee, and they've worked through several of their projects, so they are ripe to taking on something new, and I think you'll find some affinity on that group. I send you an email about it late afternoon, too.
Another piece of this that I like is that we try to balance continuing projects and new projects. And what you have done is said, I'm going to do the research and bring back a well-founded proposal. And I like that sort of sequence. So when we look at your recommendations, we will be in a better position to understand them. And I think that's fabulous. So if I'm reading this correctly, right now, we've really not made too big a ask of staff. The liaison position is something we're exploring and looking at. The template is something that we might need staff time with. We're exploring the liaison with the tech industry and the Stanford experts. Your program, Researching ADA Standards, goes alone. If people think we have capacity for 2 more, I'd like to ask Commissioner Lee to take 1, and that would be the response to the community interest in recognizing the name of Fred Yamamoto.
Yeah, I think this one overlaps with a lot of the other ideas listed, including engaging with our Chinese and Indian immigrant communities, as well as just ongoing efforts to reach out to the Welcoming America effort. I think the school renaming debate has highlighted the need for us and our community to really engage with folks who may be newer to our community and who may not necessarily have been the traditional groups that we have focused on in the past. And so I see this as those opportunities to address the larger issues, generally speaking, whether it's through programs or events, but also, if there is a community interest in taking a specific short-term action and recognizing Fred Yamamoto, whether it's renaming a park or some other way of recognizing him, I think that would be a short-term, one-off sort of solution, but engaging in the larger issue in communities that the most recent school renaming debate highlighted.
I have a question for staff. I know in African American History Month, we honored about 6 or 7 people here. What is the process to getting council to honor somebody like an Asian American Month in May for Fred Yamamoto? What could we make that recommendation from the HRC?
I think you certainly can. I think the African American, I think that started with a conversation with a one of our council members and an East Palo Alto council members at an engagement. And then that idea blossomed into, I think we've been a 2-year event. I'm not sure if we're on our 3rd year for that event. So that could be a recommendation. I mean, you can make a recommendation for a proclamation for someone, and that doesn't have to be something that's huge. That's done at the very early part of the council under something called special orders of the day, so that HRC can make a proclamation, just like we do it for commissioners that go off the commission. But if something's very specific, if you're looking for, asking the council to have special recognition ceremonies during different months, I think then my thought would be, how many recognition months would there be, and how deep that conversation, how deep that recommendation would be.
Well, I would recommend to this commission that we look at, as part of what we're doing with engaging Asian American, Indian Americans, having some level of recognition, very much like African American History Month, where we, not just one person, but a group of individuals that have given their time and effort to our community and have really made an impact, because it's obvious the insidious and almost underlying tones that were used in that argument, that we have to highlight that people are giving a significant part to our community.
That might fit under the umbrella of Welcoming America, where we're focusing on different immigrant stories and the struggles that they've overcome and the lessons that they have taught us about American values. And that'll be in September of this year. I'd like to take a crack at summarizing where we are. I'm sorry.
One thing I want to do is, I would encourage this commission to decouple ethnicity and immigration. Because by saying a group is an immigrant group, you're bringing it's two different arguments that they're proposing.
Thank you.
So I would be very careful on, as we develop whatever our recommendations are, decoupling those two, because one charges a different kind of energy, and there are people that are 2nd generation, 3rd generation of Asian descent in our community that add value to our community that are not immigrants, and we need to decouple, I think, that.
Well said. Councilmember Wellback.
You turned off your mic.
And just to echo that, I think our 2016 December resolution specifically highlighted ancestry and also country of origin and immigration status, all as separate items.
Yeah, I wanted to add that this item, it makes me a little uncomfortable. I'm afraid that Fred Yamamoto and his contribution, not just to Palo Alto, but to our country, kind of got made into a symbolic issue and set off kind of a internal battle between the Japanese American community and the Chinese American community locally. And I think I would like to see the commission focus on this broader issue. Why was there so much animosity around that between those two different Asian cultural groups? And I'm not sure turning Fred Yamamoto into a symbol is going to really address the root of that problem, which is a deep, difficult problem, and that needs to be handled with a great deal of sensitivity. So I just want us to be aware of that. Not that Fred Yamamoto wasn't an American hero, because he was, and he was a Japanese American who experienced the internment camps, but there's something else bubbling beneath the surface here that could be very appropriate for us to reach out to both those communities about, but we need to figure out a way to do that, and I don't want to just do a Band-Aid symbolic gesture.
No, and that's sort of why I suggested that there might be a more immediate short-term action we could take in response to the school renaming, but there are sort of larger issues, and it's not even a Japanese American versus a Chinese American issue. It's a bit more nuanced than that. I think it was very interesting. I'm a 3rd generation Chinese American, and there are particular segments of say, the Chinese immigrant population, which held different views. And so the multiple layers to it, which I think are larger issues that we need to address. So I feel like there needs to be a more immediate, perhaps direct response that heals some of the tension that arose in the community in direct response to this, but also kind of, as you mentioned, try to tackle some of the larger issues. And of course, we'll be very, very as sensitive as we can to.
And I think you bring up a great point, Commissioner Onan, that Asian American is not a monolithic group. And I think however we approach it, we need to, even in those of Chinese descent, there are significant differences among different groups and so I think we have to have a very sophisticated approach, and I think just highlighting, like just Mr. Yamamoto as the Asian is probably the worst thing we can do. I think looking for people from different backgrounds and different things and making it more of a broader, meeting different constituencies would be a better approach and a little bit more sophisticated instead of a very black and white approach.
I just wanted to know if someone could edify me on how this commission came to consider honoring this individual. Was this individual someone who lived out the values that the commission is meant to support in terms of, the local community? I had trouble with this, and I didn't know if this was really within our purview as a Human Relations Commission, perhaps because I wasn't edified on his story. So maybe someone who proposed this might edify us about that.
Did we want to do that now, or I'd be happy to maybe at a further meeting or offline?
Offline, that would be really,
Can I say it would be good to get it on the record for the commission so
Just in brief.
So that if anybody ever looks back, they know why we did this.
Yeah, why is it that this person was, brought out
Sure.
as...
So in the process of the school district trying to rename 2 of the middle schools, they looked at various historical Palo Altans who made significant contributions. So Fred Yamamoto was a second-generation Japanese American, went to Palo Alto High School, served in the U.S. Army, was interned, right? So it's sort of his service, despite the fact that he was classified as other during World War II, which led the school renaming committee to unanimously recommend him for one of the renaming schools.
He died in action
He died
during
in
World War
action.
II. Despite having been interned, he still fought for this country.
So as a result of that recommendation, a division arose in our community of those of both Japanese and Chinese descent who supported it and those who didn't. The school board ended up not adopting that as one of the recommended names. Out of that, though, both groups had this idea that perhaps we should honor him in a different way. One example they gave was renaming a city park after him. And so,
Is that something that we do?
well, certainly the city would have the purview to name one of its parks after something, and that recommendation could come from the commission.
I think that recommendation, when we've talked about this in the past, that members of the Human Relations Commission could be in dialogue with members of the Park and Recreation Commission. I think that would be more appropriately come from that commission.
Yeah, I mean, ideally it would be a joint well, in my opinion.
It could be a joint recommendation, but I would feel very uncomfortable unless there was dialogue with the Parks and Recreation Commission. That would be a little bit of an overstep from the Human Relations Commission. So it is the Human Relations Commission responding to a situation in the community that started at the school district. In this instance.
And I think Commissioner Onan said it best. When you look at the tension in the community, it is something that the Human Relations Commission has to address because it's something that's bubbling underneath I want to pick my words very carefully, in a population that we have not focused on in any significant way as far as how we speak to the issues. Multiple populations, I should say, not a singular, but multiple populations. So do I think we need to have a response to the issue? Yes. So I don't think just naming a park, I think the commission needs to have a more in-depth response to this because there's a lot of constituencies that need to come to the table.
Well, so I would see this as sort of step one, or one of the steps we would take.
Okay.
Certainly, this was an idea that has been floated in the community, which seems to have broad consensus on both sides of that particular issue. So I would see it as one short-term, immediate action we can do, but again, the larger issues are things that this commission needs to address in a sophisticated and concerted effort.
I'm
over the
going
long
to
term.
call this discussion. I think there's still a lot of controversy or uncertainty about that, but the idea of folding that response as a short term and a longer term under the Welcoming America, which is really, or the inclusive public engagement, which was our way of talking about being an inclusive society for ethnicities. And extending that might be a way to look at that more in depth.
I would like to recommend that this becomes its own subgenre because there's a lot of different cultural norms that don't fall under our regular programming. So I think it is, when you Commissioner, when he said something very insightful at our retreat. He said, in my culture, we didn't even know how to participate in government or conversation. It's not a simple, let's just hold a program for a group. Has to be a lot of bridge building, relationship building, conversations, getting community leaders, respected people at the table.
I in no way was shortcutting the process. I was looking for an inclusive category to be inclusive, to do the work and come back with some in-depth thinking about how we are much more thoughtful and rigorous in our approach to the diverse ethnicities in the community. On one hand, I'm excited about the way we've gone forward, but on the other hand, I'm a little scared. This is a huge plate. I would like to propose that we come back to that we look at what we have. One is a liaison position, looking at a non-voting liaison position. One is a template for fostering community conversations, partnering with the tech industry and and exploring conversations with Stanford, disability issues, and then the ethnicities. I guess I'd like people to indicate their interest in subcommittees, and we come back, we use this time between July and September to look at more proposals. I think we may find that our plate is too full, but we would benefit by having some more in-depth work or some more in-depth ideas. So looking at what would be the goal, the mission, the vision, if you will, and then what would be some options to go forward, maybe the upside and downside of different options, but no more commitment than that. Does that make sense? Do you think we could do that?
I'm not sure I understand.
I'd like to have people express their interest in those 5 categories.
I ended up with 4 categories.
Oh, did I count wrong? I'm sorry.
We have the HRC liaison position with PA-USD.
That's 1.
We have the community meeting 3 times a year.
2.
we have the partner with tech and gender equity joined together because we're going to reach out to Cynthia Lee. And then we had the response to Yamamoto and the engage with immigrant and ethnic communities as the last one. And your ADA, I'm sorry. I marked that as a personal research project because the commissioner you had asked for responses on who was going to do them, and you had already committed to it.
Right, but the full commission would then have to respond to whatever I bring back, so it will end up being on their plate.
So I think what Chair Stinger is looking for, and for the new commissioners, in the past, we've had kind of just a simple worksheet. When you had a work plan item, it was like, what are you thinking of doing? What resources would you need? What format were you thinking about? And it was just a way of having the subgroups think through something that is a suggestion to see how really feasible it is. So I think at this point, using that form, but really honing in on what you would like to do, and then with the understanding you would bring that back in September. And at that point, there still may be some hard conversations saying, okay, you've fleshed it out a little bit, thanks for sharing that. We only can take on 2 of those, or we can take on 3 of those, or if someone has a passion to do all that extra work. But I think the commitment is now, I think it's good that we've compressed some together. I think once we have a sense of a deeper depth, the scope of time something would take, and to look at it a little more fully, I think at that point you'd be able to make a better decision to say, that sounded like a great idea, thank you for fleshing it out. I don't think we could take that on this year. Or, you know what, let's look at it at mid-year, because something else we thought of might not take as much time, or it just may not happen.
I think you remember at the retreat when we were asked what things we need from the commission. I said I needed some boundaries, that I'm apt to take on more than I can really manage, I'm just apt to say yes when I need somebody to point out the limitations. And given that, if I'm afraid about the amount of work that we're looking at, I think it says something. But each of these is so important, I'd really like to give it a try. So of those, if you would indicate your first choice and your willingness to serve on other committees.
Could I just add one thing, Chair?
Please.
About the second category, which is developing a format for the community conversations to be held 3 times a year, that's something I feel the entire commission has to buy into. Normally, we operate on a subcommittee level and 2 or 3 people work on a project, but that's a huge community-facing project, and it's too big of a burden to dump on 2 or 3 people. Basically, the way I see it is we would, as a commission, have to come up with a template, and then probably 2 of us at a time would have to agree to do one of those events. You're up, we're up, you're up, and then we're done. So nobody would have to do it more than once a year.
I think that...
But pretty much everybody would have to agree to take a turn, either to be planning it, leading it, wingmanning it, whatever you want to call it. But if it can't just be like the same 2 or 3 people all the time doing
My
that
understanding
project.
was that the committee would form the format of it, but they wouldn't necessarily plan the 3 events.
That was my intention.
Oh, okay, that would be okay.
And the question you raised is the question we will ask in September. Do we have...
The bandwidth. I have a question for staff. 2 summers ago, we did a whole research project on how to do community meetings.
We did it for a very specific type of community meeting,
But
but there's lessons learned from that.
There was about 30 examples, if I remember correctly.
There were, yes, very specific to having community conversations on issues of bias, and
Is there any way that we can use that research as the
Certainly.
foundational piece?
Certainly.
Because there was I don't remember the details of it, but I do remember there was a lot of different
Right.
formats in there to start the
And
discussion.
the intern wrote a report on the different formats that we still have somewhere.
Okay. I would like to skip item 2 and move to reports from officials. Commissioner reports.
Well, I'd like to remind everybody that CARA, which is one of our new HISRAP grantees, is a nonprofit that does grief counseling, has an annual summer camp for children who have lost a parent or a sibling. The camp is free. It's funded by a private grant, and we have been all invited to go up to camp. It's called Camp Aaron. It's up in Livermore. I believe it's July 21st. So Jim Santucci, the executive director of CARA, would welcome any and all human relations commissioners who would like to visit. We will get a VIP tour of the camp and get to see the kids at some of their activities. I think we have to go in the morning, and I think it's then we have lunch there, and then I think it's until early afternoon, I believe. So I have not yet responded to Jim's invitation, but I'm going to see if I can clear my schedule for that Saturday and go. And so if anyone wants to go and possibly carpool, please keep it in mind, and hopefully at least a couple of us can make it up there.
July 21st.
I think it's July 21st, Saturday.
I have two things to mention. First, reminder that August 20th is our, isn't it on?
It's on.
August 20th is our council date. And all are welcome and expected to support the recommendations that came out of the commission this winter as we take them to council. And the other is a good news. As former Commissioner Mehdi Al-Hassani listened to the presentation from La Comida, he noted that they wanted a van to transport food from one site to another. And he worked within Palantir to get a van donated to La Comida. So we will thank Palantir and Mehdi or Commissioner Al-Hassani in September. Those are my two updates. Any other commissioner reports? Council liaison, anything to say? And staff?
The only thing is I wanted to bring the commission's attention to an at-place memo regarding an update on the city's response to the anti-LGBT posters. That is the information that I have to date on this issue. You could read it through. If you have further questions, you can feel free to email me. But the city is very pleased that the commission already had a subcommittee in place to address these issues and looks forward to your work on this issue in the upcoming months.
Thank you for putting together that memo. I appreciate it.
We have a holiday in August, and we'll reconvene in September. Tentative agenda for that meeting. Items that we'd like included.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we're not going to discuss liaison roles today, so should we do that in September?
I did circulate in the materials at places you're right, thank you, Vice Chair Onan. I made a first pass at assigning liaisons based on the requests that people had submitted, and they are at your place. I think maybe, Mary, could you send a contact person? Name? And I will speak to each of you about the council liaisons. I don't think we need to do that as a commission.
May I ask a question? So I see, so on the senior dementia friendly, we have Vice Chair Onan and Commissioner Kralik. May I maybe make a suggestion for Commissioner Kralik to consider being the liaison to Avenidas, and that only involves maybe meeting with them once or twice a year to get a sense of what the senior issues that are important in the community. It's nothing more than once or twice a year. So if you want to consider that, then we would have each of the positions full. So I'm not expecting an answer now, but I just had that thoughts.
Thank you, and we can talk about that offline.
Random question. Can we get a contact list of all the commissioners? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. We will clearly want to have a debrief on our council presentation in September. And we'll want to look at each of our ongoing and projects, the status of them, and the proposals for moving forward on new projects. The other thing that I would suggest is that we have his rep coming up in the mid-year, and I think we need to do a needs assessment, review a survey in September.
Thank you for reminding me. Yes, that needs to be on the agenda to review the manner in which we will do a needs assessment or maybe an in-depth survey to our nonprofit providers. I'm glad you wrote that down. I had that, but didn't have it on it right now.
Anything?
It's pretty full.
It's a really
Mary
full
just said you've
schedule.
got
I'm
like
looking
7
at this.
items
I
there,
was ready.
so we'll need to talk.
I was looking at this and thinking, I need to ask people how late they can stay. That's a really,
How about 2 meetings in September?
we'll deal with
I
that.
think we'll need to be judicious in our conversations.
I think maybe what I will do is ask a few people to present some ideas, and we'll just take a few ideas rather than try to do everything. Well, unless anybody has any final words, we're ready for vacation. And I hope you all have a good August. Travel safe.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.